Namaskar, Nilesh Oak with another session of Dr. No Shorts, Part 4. In this session, we are going to discuss additional evidence, additional archaeology evidence for flooding and destruction of Krishna's Dwarka in 5525 BCE. Well, let me know your comments about what you think of this first page of Dr. No Shorts, Part 4. All right. So what are we going to discuss today? We are going to see the connection between kangaroos, and Krishna's Dwarka. Now you must be wondering, what is that connection? What do kangaroos have anything to do with flooding and destruction of Krishna's Dwarka in 5525 BCE? Well, the connection is to Australia, and in our quest to find the archaeology evidence around the world. Now, this is not where I started. In fact, what I wanted to find out is if the archaeology evidence existed on the west coast of India, where Dwarka is. And of course, I'm going to share that evidence with you. But that search of mine led me around the world. And we have already looked at evidence from the Black Sea Formation, that's the border of Asia and Europe. We also looked at evidence from the Caribbean, the West Indies. And today we are going to look at the evidence from Australia, specifically eastern part of Australia and the famous Great Barrier Reef. So let's go there. Geographically, to place you, remember, anything that we discuss always needs the context, desha, kala, and patra. So the time, place, and the context. Okay, so desha, that is the place, kala is the time, and the patra is the personalities involved or the context. This is Australia, and if you look at the top right-hand corner, that is northeast direction. That's where the Great Barrier Reef is. And this is a paper from not that long ago, 2020, okay, from Sedimentary Geology, a new model of Holocene reef initiation. By Holocene, it simply means last 10,000 years in a simple way. Holocene reef initiation and growth in response to sea level rise on the southern Great Barrier Reef. And what are we going to see here? Well, I am going to move myself, but you may not be able to see this when you watch the video, and that's fine. You are not going to miss much. The horizontal scale is the scale of time, thousands of years, 1,000 years before present. So we are starting with a 0 here and going backwards. This is 2,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, 6,000 years ago, 8,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, and so on. Not to get into the technical details, this is done using similar scientific evidence that is found through the growth, accumulation, accretion of the coral reefs, but this time at the Great Barrier Reef. Remember the word reef. Last time we looked at the evidence from multiple locations at West Indies or from the area of the Caribbean. This is again a fascinating graph. What are you seeing on the x-axis? Okay, how that is the change in the water level. So remember, the horizontal axis as we go in the past, antiquity to 10,000 years in the past. Okay, so we are going to start from the right to the left, and right here I'm going to draw a line so that helps. This is 8,000 years ago. This is 6,000 years ago. So this in the middle is 7,000 years ago. And remember when the Mahabharata war happened, 5561 BCE, So that's what, 7,583 years. So somewhere here. So just to mark that position for 5525 BC, the year when Krishna's Dwarka was destroyed by gushing sea waters. Notice what's happening around the world. A sudden sea level rise increase. Okay, now some of you, those who are not familiar with scientific research, they would say, well, I don't know if this is sudden, because if you look at the X scale, the time scale, you would say, that goes, practically like a 9,000 before present, 9,000 years before present. And that's correct. Okay. So, and that's why I shared the evidence from West Indies before this. There is, in a way, a continuous increase in the sea level rise, but there are catastrophic rise events. But the point I want you to take from this presentation, actually 2 points, 2 specific points. One is that the peak of that sea level rise, or if you want to think that as a single pulse, essentially, because when the evidence is collected, the evidence may have a spread, and for many different reasons. In fact, that becomes a detective work to find out why there is a spread. And sometime I will take some simple example and show you the demonstration of that. Okay, that's also the reason, for one of the reasons, not the only reason, for the standard error, the variation, the error band that you see around any quantifiable scientific estimate. But the important point, the first takeaway, is that that single pulse, essentially, if you want to look at this straight vertical rise there, it comes and ends, guess where? 5525 BCE, 7,500 years ago. The second takeaway I want you to internalize as we go through this journey is that after that first pulse, what do you see to the sea level? Now, keep in mind, the sea levels are going to show different phenomenon in different places. We talked about the land subsidence, because remember, the reference of a sea level is also with respect to the land. Because frankly, if you remember the basic scientific law about the liquids, but let's limit ourselves to water. If all the water bodies are connected, then they are going to come to a same level, unless there is some external barrier or externally affecting force. So the sea levels around the world should be in principle the same. So why do we see a varying levels of sea levels in the different areas of the world? That has to do with the land subsidence, okay? The change in the land itself with respect to the sea level at any given point, okay? And we will look at that kind of evidence as we continue this journey, okay? So the second point I want you to notice is that after that 5525 BCE, for a practical purposes, the sea level has remained constant, some variations up and down. And in fact, I want you to notice another year, okay? In this case, it may not be the most clear one, because it appears like around that 4,000 before present, so like 2000 BC, there is that bump, okay? Some small addition. That's what might be observed locally at the Great Barrier Reef. But from 4,000 BCE, if you look at to our times, essentially the seawater level or sea level is stationary or actually going down as we come to our times. This is very important for every one of you to understand as we relate this not only as a corroborating and validating evidence for the flooding and destruction of Krishna's Dwarka in 5525 BCE, 36 years after the Mahabharata war, which happened in 5561 BCE. But actually, all of this evidence individually, but also together, forms a extremely scientific, logical, strong evidence a falsifying evidence against all the other alternate claims for the year of Mahabharata war, but also for the year therefore claimed for the flooding and destruction of Krishna's Dwarka. That is the beauty of the evidence that I am sharing. Other than that, guys, we are done. Just notice the significant pulse that you are saying. Exactly in 5525 BC, about 7,500 years ago, then the sea level basically leveled off. Yes, there is some ups and downs. Be ready for comprehending, internalizing these variations. The variations that you are seeing here at the Great Barrier Reef may not exactly be the same variation that you will see in, say, West Indies data, or say Dwarka data, or the data on the east coast of India, or the data coming from other parts of Australia, data coming from other parts of the world, such as, say, Europe, or data coming from some other parts, such as, say, Indonesia, or China, or Japan. Okay, that's it. So the 4000 BC is another thing to remember. And we are going to make a connection of this with the archaeological places such as Lothal, such as Dholavira, and the areas of Sindhu Saraswati civilization, and of course to Krishna's Dwarka, which is no longer accessible, because Krishna's Dwarka is now the place, the location of Krishna's Dwarka is way inside the ocean, the Sindhu Sagar, Arabian Sea, okay, some 10-20 kilometers or farther inside the ocean. It's no longer something that we can access it. The Krishna's Dwarka of 6th millennium BC is not to be confused with today's Dwarka, where we have a Krishna Mandir. All right. So with that, just to summarize, we looked at the evidence from the Black Sea, which is from Turkey, the border of Asia and Europe, 9 different scientific parameters leading us to 5525 BCE, a sudden sea level rise. In Caribbean, the West Indies, 7+ different location, significant 6 meters plus, 20 feet plus sea level rise. Suddenly, when 5525 BCE, 5600 BCE plus minus 100 years. And today we looked at a sudden sea level rise reaching its peak at 5525 BC, 7,500 years ago, at Great Barrier Reef in Australia. That's all I have. I'll see you shortly in another episode of Dr. No Shorts. Namaskar.